Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at the business of sports, brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'm here to coach you through the financial game. We'll look beyond the headlines, analyze all the latest sports news, the teams, trades, and billion-dollar deals, so you and your portfolio will win big. This week, we are breaking down the money behind Super Bowl 59, taking a look at Fanatics' most recent financial performance, the latest in MLS's production pact with IMG, and looking ahead to Caitlin Clark's signature shoe deal with Nike. I'll also be joined by founder and chairman of Athletes.org, Jim Cavale, to talk all things college sports. Let's huddle up and get right into it. All right, it's time for this week's Pomps Playbook, where I take a look at some of the biggest headlines in sports that you and your portfolio need to know. Let's kick things off by talking about Fanatics' record year. According to a recent report from Sportico, Fanatics generated $8.1 billion in 2024 revenue, a 15% increase from 2023. Fanatics' business can be broken down into three parts. The first is Fanatics Commerce, apparel and merchandise, at $6.2 billion in annual revenue. Next up is Fanatics Collectibles, or trading cards, at $1.6 billion in annual revenue. And lastly, you have Fanatics Betting and Gaming, or sports betting, at $300 million in annual revenue. Fanatics CFO Glenn Schiffman told Sportico that the company has raised around $3 billion in equity, spent $1.5 billion of that on 10 acquisitions, and brought on 5,000 new employees since 2021. Fanatics now has around $400 million in total debt on its business and finished 2024 with $1 billion in cash. Schiffman also told Sportico that he expects the entire company to be profitable in 2025. Fanatics Commerce is also still humming along, as their unique equity-based partnership model with all the major sports leagues has created an incentive for those leagues to market the merchandise. Fanatics has also done collaborations with companies like Nike and Lululemon, and they recently launched their first branded uniform with the NHL. Overall, Fanatics Commerce and Fanatics Collectibles are profitable, but Fanatics Sportsbook, like most sportsbooks, is not after its launch in 2023. Although Fanatics was on track to IPO when it was solely an e-commerce business, Schiffman told Sportico that the company does not have any plans for an IPO in the near future, as it continues to build itself into a one-stop shop for all sports fans. Remember, in December 2022, this was a huge business and it's only getting bigger. Fanatics was valued at $31 billion at the time. Next up, I want to talk about Caitlin Clark's signature shoe deal with Nike. Nike CEO Elliott Hill recently confirmed in an interview with Fortune that Caitlin Clark's signature shoe is on the way. Hill said that the company is working with the 2024 WNBA Rookie of the Year on her logo and shoes design, but did not reveal a specific timeline on when the shoe would be released. Clark notably signed an 8-year, $28 million endorsement deal with Nike after she was drafted number 1 by the Indiana Fever in the 2024 WNBA draft. This was essentially a continuation of the NIL deal that Caitlin Clark had with Nike while at the University of Iowa, and it's the largest sponsorship contract ever for a women's basketball player. Once the shoe is released, Clark will be one of just 3 active WNBA players with a signature shoe from Nike, along with Sabrina Ionescu of the New York Liberty and Asia Wilson of the Las Vegas Aces. Elliott Hill also noted to Fortune that Nike has a small team dedicated to women's basketball now, and said that, quote, "It is an area we'll continue to invest in with tremendous momentum right now." Nike's emphasis on signature shoes for Ionescu, Wilson, and Clark is no surprise. Hill has stated that his focus as Nike CEO, a role that he just took over last October, is to center the company's focus back on the athlete, both at the professional and consumer level. Nike stock is still down 26% in the past year, but is showing promise under Hill with a 4% gain over the last 6 months. Next up in this week's Pomps Playbook is a production pact between MLS and IMG. Earlier this week, Major League Soccer announced that it will move its media and production arm, MLS Productions, to the WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, as part of a multi-year broadcast production renewal with IMG. WWE Studios will house IMG's production of over 600 annual games on MLS Season Pass on Apple TV, and all of the league studio shows too. The Stamford studio will serve as the MLS hub for live studio programming in both English and Spanish, and MLS says the new studios will allow MLS Productions to add new programming during the upcoming 2025 season. The WWE state-of-the-art facility, a 30,000 square foot building with 5 studios containing advanced production technology, will be set up to meet the exact needs of MLS Productions and allows the league to centralize its operations. Of note, TKO Group Holdings, which owns the WWE and UFC, recently agreed to acquire IMG from Endeavor in a purchase that is on target to be completed in the first half of 2025. So this makes a ton of sense for WWE, as they recently opened this new studio in Stamford, explicitly stating at the time that they wanted to have a space that they could offer to other media companies for use too. TKO stock is up 77% over the past year, and Stamford, Connecticut continues to be the mecca of live sports production, as ESPN, NBC, and the New York Yankees' own Yes Network all have studios there too. This week for the deeper dive, where I give you a play-by-play analysis of news in the sports world and its significance to your bottom line, we're talking about Netflix and how live sports is helping skyrocket its stock. Last week, Netflix announced that the company added nearly 19 million subscribers last quarter. The subscriber addition was a record for the company and vaulted Netflix's count to over 300 million global subscribers. Netflix's stock is now up 13% in the past week and 70% in the past year. While Wall Street analysts have pointed to Netflix's crackdown on password sharing and increased subscribers to the streamer's ad-supported plan as reasons for the company's success, it's important to note that sports have also played a massive role. According to data from Antenna, November's boxing match between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson generated more than 1.4 million new subscriber signups for Netflix. And Netflix's $150 million investment in 2 exclusive NFL Christmas Day games also paid off, as Antenna reported that the streamer added 650,000 new subscribers in the days following the 2 games. The Paul vs. Tyson fight and the NFL games accounted for roughly 10% of Netflix's record 19 million new signups last quarter. But more importantly, the sports-driven subscriber growth shows that Netflix's live sports strategy is working. Although Netflix has said in the 2010s that it wasn't interested in acquiring live sports rights, the streamer has reversed course in the last few years. In addition to one-off events like the Paul Tyson match and NFL Christmas Day games, Netflix also recently signed a deal with FIFA for exclusive US broadcasting rights to the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup. Within these moves, Netflix is showing that it's only interested in live special events, not streaming random NBA games on a Tuesday night. We've seen every streamer employ their own live sports strategy so far. Apple bought rights to Major League Soccer because they wanted to own an entire league, and Amazon acquired NFL's Thursday Night Football because it helped the e-commerce giant add more Prime subscriptions than any other event in the company's history. But Netflix knows they can receive 80% of the benefit from these media rights deals by investing just a fraction of the money that would typically be required for live sports. Although streaming companies invest billions in unscripted dramas, live sports are still the greatest unscripted drama. And one-off live sporting events help lower Netflix's industry-leading churn rate because they diversify the platform's content. Live sports are also a valuable customer acquisition tool and drive incredible value for advertising. That's because live sports account for roughly nearly 95% of most watched TV shows each year. But the assumption has always been that these media rights are more valuable to cable companies because the content is better monetized through ads than solely as a customer acquisition tool. However, Netflix has found a way to do both, because while a subscriber might not want to watch ads while watching an episode of The Night Agent, they don't think twice when that same ad is shown during an NFL game. So, live sports allow Netflix to show advertisements to both ad-supported and premium plan subscribers, because sports fans expect to see in-game ads regardless, and live sporting events are constructed around advertising breaks. Netflix will soon stop reporting its subscriber numbers on its earnings calls to push investors to focus more on typical financial metrics, but don't be surprised if Netflix aggressively expands into its sports strategy in the coming years. Remember, the NFL can opt out of its current $110 billion media rights deal after the 2029 season. And given the NFL is the only American sports league that can guarantee tens of millions of viewers each game, a 5 to 10 game package could be of interest to Netflix down the line. We've made it to the one-on-one, a conversation where I get to break down news and sports with a key player in the industry. This week, I'm joined by Athletes.org founder and chairman Jim Cavall to discuss all things NIL. Jim, thanks so much for joining the show. How are you?
Man, I'm great, Joe. Thanks so much for having me. I've been following your stuff for a long time, and you've helped me make some good investment decisions, by the way. So thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Let's start with, for people who don't know anything about athletes.org, if you could just give a quick explanation of what it is and what you guys are doing.
Athletes.org is the Players Association for college athletes. College athletics revenue is $13.6 billion a year, more than the NBA. The NFL beats them by a little bit, $20 billion a year. But, the revenues are the same, but the athletes are not treated the same. And a big reason is there's no Players Association for college athletes. So we have set out to organize athletes across the country, and we're focused starting on the Power Conference athletes. There's about 10,000 of them that play football, men's, women's basketball, and we're nearing 4,000 of those being our members.
What type of conversation are you having today around the education aspect?
Yeah, I mean, athletes are really learning through practical, right? Like they're doing stuff and they're running into questions and getting them answered and learning as they go. They've never really been given access to the information around how the business of college sports works at their school, how much revenue their sport makes for the gross revenue of the school, how health and safety aspects are decided on by the school without them, and what it might look like in a similar sport at the pro level with those health and safety rules. And you can go through health and safety, compensation, transfer rules, all those things are things athletes don't really have much access to information on. So that's the biggest thing that we're providing with athletes.org is a framework, an actual association you can join. And then through joining, you get access to a member app that we use to give you access to a lot of great information so that your voice can start being heard through polls and surveys, but also through actual votes on what you think that we put out to the media. We just met with 50 of our current football athletes from power conference schools across the country in person for 2 days at the CFP in Atlanta. And we took 4 hours to go through each issue, give them information, let them go into breakout groups per conference, SEC, Big 12, Big 10, ACC athletes talked amongst themselves. Then they shared with the room. And then they voted on what they think the transfer portal should look like, what they think health and safety standards should look like. That's what's really been missing from college athletics is access to the information for the athletes.
Yeah, and Jim, one of the things that's been really interesting is NIL has essentially become pay for play, right? Like I think when most people thought it was going to be implemented, that it was going to be these endorsement deals with national brands like a Nike or a Gatorade, and we certainly see some of that. But there's been a whole nother side of this, which is just boosters and collectives raising a bunch of money to pay players to come to their school. What are some of the, I guess, downsides to that, and why is that such an important distinction from what NIL was meant to be?
The reason that NIL is being used for pay for play is pay for play. And the reason that there's no rules is because the leaders in college athletics are finite minded leaders. They're thinking 1 to 3 years out. They have been for over a century. That's because their contract, whether they're a commissioner or an AD, happens to be how many years? 1 to 3 years. So that's how they're thinking. And when Ed O'Bannon beat the NCAA in court about NIL over a decade ago, the college athletics leaders had a chance to create some structures and actually be proactive in figuring how NIL would work, and they didn't. And so instead, they waited for it to happen and be forced to do it, and we had no rules. And because of that, yes, donors are laundering money through shell companies called collectives to pay players instead of the schools paying them. And the downsides of that are there's a lot of them. Number one, they're being looked at as NIL deals on paper. So you have agents charging up to 20%, which agents charge at the pro level for typical endorsement NIL deals. But really, we know these are pay for play deals. And if there was structure around it and it was admitted that these were pay for play deals and they were papered up that way, agents probably would charge 1 to 3% like pro agents do when they do a contract, right? And so that distinction is one of many, many distinctions that if the leaders in college sports, many of which who I look at is integral people, they have integrity. Many of them I look at as people who do care about the college athlete. If they would apply integrity to what's happening and admit, look in the mirror and say, this is really pay for play, that would be the beginning of putting structure around all of this, but they just won't do it.
All right, we've got to take a quick break, but we'll be back with Jim Cavell right after this. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. I'm here with Jim Cavell. How has the agency side of things changed over the last few years? I mean, we just talked a little bit about commissions, right? The 10s, 20% versus the 1 to 3s that you would see in professional football. I imagine that composition has changed a little bit, right? Like it feels like initially a lot of these agents came in and were just looking to do exactly what you were saying, right? Take 20% off whatever deals they could. And now maybe people have gotten a little bit more sophisticated around, okay, let's charge 5 to 10% and establish a relationship with the kids. So when they go pro, then we can do the bigger pro contracts. Is that what you're seeing? Or just talk to me a little bit about how that dynamic has changed over the years.
Yeah, I'm really close with a lot of the folks who are at the top at the big agencies. And when this first started, they were slow to get involved, but realized that they had to. It's just hard for them because their business is built off of representing pro athletes who, at the current time, have much bigger contracts, goes for usually a longer career. And so these agencies have had to learn how to go downstream into college and even elite high school to recruit players. But what they've had to do is say, well, we didn't know that, Devin Booker was going to become Devin Booker when he was in high school. So we got to recruit 5 guys who could become Devin Booker and hope that we're representing the one who will. And because this guys develop in different ways, and that's just a reality of talent developing. And so that's one risk, is they just have to spend more time with more players doing contracts that are a lot smaller and don't have structure, because there's no players union that provides a standard contract. So there's a lot more legal work for the agency to do to justify more maybe than 3% being charged to do that deal. But the other risk that the big agencies have is, even when you sign a high school or college star to represent them for NIL deals in college, they are not signed to you as a pro. And so look no further than Paolo Banchero, who CAA represented while he was at Duke for 8 months, helped him make a lot of money. And then out of nowhere, right before the draft, he leaves to go to Lyft with Mike Miller. And that's a fear of a lot of agencies, is the folks they represent in college may still not sign once they become a draftee in the pros. So there's a lot of risk for the established agencies, and that's created a road for new agencies to emerge that are really more focused on college.
I would love to get your insight on just the House versus NCAA settlement that's popped up over the last few months here. For those that don't know, this settlement essentially did two main things, in my opinion, at least, which was it gave back pay billions of dollars to former college athletes, and it's now going to set a structure for the future of essentially a de facto salary cap at schools of $20.5 million starting potentially next year, that schools are allowed to spend. Talk me through why that settlement happened and what it does for the future of college sports.
Well, that settlement happened because NIL has proven that there's an immense amount of value brought by college athletes to their schools. That, just like in the NBA, when $10 billion comes in and $5 billion of it goes to the players because of the NBPA's collective bargaining agreement with the NBA, there's a value allocation that should be increased from that 13.6 billion that college athletics makes. And that value allocation should increase in a way that goes to the athletes beyond scholarships. And so the NIL deals that have happened are kind of like comps, and those comps are going to be used to provide back pay to athletes going far back as 2016. And they'll go to a website, and it's called collegeathletecompensation.com, and they'll go there and submit their name, and they can even submit some NIL deals if they played part of their career during NIL and part not during NIL. And then they'll get an estimate based on how many plays they played, what school they played at, what sport they played. The injunctive class is the class of athletes starting this summer, 2025, and that class goes for the next 10 years. It's a 10-year deal. And what they did was they said, we're going to do a 22% cap that goes to college athletes from the college's revenue for athletics. Now, that number is taken from an aggregate of all these power conference schools' total revenue, and then it creates an average, and then 22% applied to it. There are escalators so that number can go up each year over the 10 years. And so in year one, it's going to be about $20 to $21 million per school that can be shared with the athletes. The schools don't have to do it. It's their option to participate. But we all know you can't win without great players, right? Just ask coaches. They'll tell you that. So all the power conference schools and maybe a handful of others are going to fully fund the $21 million to pay their athletes starting in year one. And that means $1.5 billion is going to go to college athletes starting this summer. And like I said, it's a 10-year deal. I think by year 10, the cap will go up beyond $30 million a year per school. And so the big thing you got to understand about this is it's not a pay for play deal that the school is doing with the athletes, because the schools and the NCAA and the conferences are so scared of college athletes becoming employees. They're going to do these as NIL deals. You're having athletes right now sign NIL deals with schools. They think they're signing to go play wide receiver. But little do they know, the contract says you can't do NIL deals in this category. You can't do NIL deals in this category. Also, you got to do these 10 deliverables to promote the school. And all of a sudden, there's going to be a lot of confused athletes. And that's a big problem. And it's a problem that if the integral leaders of college athletics would look in the mirror and say, this isn't NIL, this is actually pay for play, they could start to figure out how to put a structure around it where there are agent regulations and caps on what agents can charge. There is a standard contract that the athlete signs with the school that has some boundaries to it.
There's just so much going on now between the transfer portal, NIL, the settlement, some of the Title IX stuff coming out recently. And you do a great job of articulating it all into a more concise bucket that we can understand. So thanks so much for joining us, Jim. The clock is winding down here, but we have just enough time for some final buzz. So let's talk about some numbers behind this year's Super Bowl. This year's Super Bowl matchup is set with the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Kansas City Chiefs at the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans on Sunday, February 9th. While the biggest storylines that come to mind are the Chiefs' pursuit of the NFL's first Super Bowl three-peat and the Eagles looking to get revenge in a rematch of the 2023 Super Bowl, here are some sports business storylines that you need to know for this year's big game. The Eagles are owned by Jeffrey Lurie, a film producer who is worth $5.3 billion and purchased the team in 1994 for $185 million. The Chiefs are owned by the Hunt family, who are collectively worth $24.8 billion, and whose fortune was built on H.L. Hunt's oil empire. H.L.'s son, Lamar Hunt, paid $25 million in 1960 to become the founder of the Kansas City Chiefs, as part of the American Football League before its merger with the NFL in 1970. Lamar Hunt's children, Lamar Hunt Jr., Sharon Hunt, Clark Hunt, and Daniel Hunt, now own the Kansas City Chiefs today. The game will feature the NFL's 8th most valuable team in the Eagles, who are valued at $6.6 billion by Forbes, while the Chiefs are the 24th most valuable team at almost $5 billion. According to Forbes, the Eagles generated $650 million in revenue last year versus the Chiefs at $591 million in revenue. The highest paid player for the Chiefs is quarterback Patrick Mahomes with an average annual salary of $45 million, while the highest paid player for the Eagles is also quarterback Jalen Hurts, with an average annual salary slightly higher at $51 million each year. Running back Saquon Barkley has to be very happy with the Eagles reaching the Super Bowl, as Barkley earned a $250,000 bonus for the Eagles' NFC Championship win and could make another $250,000 if the Philadelphia Eagles win the Super Bowl. As for tickets, prices are actually 14% lower than last year's Super Bowl when compared to the same point in time as last year, primarily because the game was in Las Vegas last year versus New Orleans this year. However, that doesn't mean tickets are cheap. StubHub's average ticket price right now is still at over $8,000 per ticket. As for the stadium, the Caesars Superdome will be ready for the big game after $560 million in renovations that were finished ahead of the 2024 NFL season. The renovations included new concourses and vending areas, new escalators that can take game attendees to the highest levels of the dome, and improve lighting throughout the stadium. The Caesars Superdome will host its record-tying 8th Super Bowl game, and Super Bowl 59 is expected to generate $500 million in economic impact for New Orleans and also the state of Louisiana. We're all out of time, so it's officially game over for this week. Thank you so much to Jim and for all of you for joining us. Make sure to tune in to Yahoo Finance Sports Reports on Thursdays at 5 p.m. wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.